This is the Lenovo Legion Go, and I think the best way to explain this handheld is as if a Steam Deck and Nintendo Switch had a baby, in all the right ways. Hello everybody, my name is Robert, and this is Bite Size Clue. So yes, this is the Legion Go, one of the Windows 11 handhelds which have come out in recent years due to the success surrounding the Steam Deck. But the Legion Go has a few gimmicks which I think make it the best in terms of Windows handhelds that you can buy right now. In the box, of course, you get the console itself, but you also get a soft shell carry case, similar to that you would get with many of the other handhelds on the market. You also get a fast charger, but perhaps most interestingly, you have this little plastic puck, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Holding the Legion for the first time, you will notice just how heavy it is. It comes in at around 850 grams, and that is pretty beefy. You probably wouldn't want to drop this on your face if you're playing it in bed. It packs in a lot of power. We've got the Ryzen Z1 Extreme chip, as well as 18GB of RAM and 500GB of storage. They do also offer a terabyte option, and I think if I were to purchase this again, I probably would go with that model, only because 500GB fills up pretty quickly, especially when you've got games like Baldur's Gate, which take up 115GB on their own. Front and centre, we of course have that screen, and this is perhaps one of the biggest draws for the Legion Go. It is an 8.8-inch screen, and it is absolutely beautiful. I've never felt so immersed in my games. Now, I am visually impaired, so having a bigger screen is instantly a bigger draw to me, and it's one of the things that really I felt let down by with the Steam Deck. That screen just felt that little bit too small to properly enjoy games, especially games like Baldur's Gate again, which have a lot of text on screen that require me to read. This screen is also 144Hz. There is no OLED here, so you are not going to get those inky blacks that you're going to get from the Steam Deck OLED, but quite honestly, I don't miss it here. This is one of the best screens that you can get on a gaming handheld right now. We of course have the two controllers on the side, with all the standard buttons that you would expect. Along the top you've got the Legion and the Legion menu buttons. We'll talk a little bit more about those later. I personally don't like the placement of them. I feel like this should more be a start and select button, but that can be changed in the settings at any point. You have the two thumbsticks in a PlayStation style layout rather than the Xbox layout where you've got one higher than the other. Just below that we've got the D-pad on the left hand side. I don't like this D-pad. Every other button on this device feels really nice. It's clicky and it's raised up just enough from the surface that you can easily touch it and it doesn't feel cheap. However, this D-pad just feels a little bit too recessed into the body, meaning that I found it hard to use, especially with fighting games like Mortal Kombat. And on the bottom of the left-hand controller, you've got the start and select buttons. Again, I probably would swap these two and the Legion buttons round, just because that seems to make more sense to me. On the right-hand side, you've obviously got the A, B, X, Y buttons. These feel really nice. Below the thumbstick, we have a place for the trackpad. There is only one trackpad as opposed to the two that you get on the Steam Deck, and it seems to feel pretty good. I use it mainly for navigating windows and launching my apps. So along the top of the device, we of course on the controllers have two triggers and two trigger buttons as well. Along the top we've got two upward facing speakers. This is really where the Legion Go falls down. Speaker quality is not great here, and I would recommend if you're going to be playing it for any period of time using some Bluetooth headphones or even using the 3.5mm jack. These speakers are just not very good. You of course have the volume rocker, one of the two USB-C ports, and a place for the microSD card. You can install games to the microSD card to play, but do bear in mind that this will be slower than the inbuilt storage. So games that you want to load very quickly, I would perhaps favour to the SSD rather than the SD card. We also have the fan exhaust on the top here. This is similarly placed to where it is on the Steam Deck, and trust me, I've sniffed these vents. They smell pretty much the same too. And if you know, then you know. You also have the power button. This also has a coloured ring around the outside, which will change based upon the power mode that you're in. There is no way to set a particular colour for this, and that seems like an oversight. I think I'd like to see some way of being able to customise that power button. Along the bottom of the main unit, we have that secondary USB-C port. I like having these two USB-C ports because I think it's a great way to be able to choose how you charge. If I'm lying in bed, for instance, I might not want the cable coming to the top of the device because that might pull it down and weigh me down. However, if I'm playing on a tabletop, then I want to be able to plug into the top. So having both these ports are great. They are both USB-C Gen 4 as well, so even support eGPUs, and it makes the Legion Go experience all that more powerful. You may notice on the bottom of the right controller, you have what appears to be an optical mouse sensor. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I promise, but it's a pretty exciting thing. Turning it round and looking at the back of the device, we see a whole host of buttons on the controllers. On the right hand side you have a scroll wheel and clickable wheel for the mouse, and you have two programmable buttons. You'll notice that these are actually laid out differently to how they are on the left. This is mainly for that new mode that we'll talk about later, but I honestly don't find myself using these additional buttons on programmable buttons very much in the games, and I find that I accidentally click them a lot while playing. And on the bottom we have a way of popping these controllers out. Let's talk about that, because we've also got a stand on the back here. You can just snap that out and sit it in a tabletop mode, much like you can with the Switch. Pressing the two buttons on those controllers and pulling them downwards allows you to remove them from the body and play in a handheld mode or tabletop mode. I actually found myself using this a little more than I expected to, mainly on trains and other journeys where I don't want to have to hold the device because, as noted, at 850 grams it is pretty heavy. The majority of the back of the device is actually taken up by the large vents here, and that's for the cooling, because this thing does get pretty hot. So we've already spoken about two main ways that you can play. You can play completely handheld, and you can play in tabletop mode. But perhaps the most interesting way to play, and a way that I don't tend to use a ton, is what they call FPS mode. Taking out that plastic puck from the bottom of the case, and taking the right controller and snapping it in there magnetically, you can actually turn on the optical mouse sensor on the bottom and physically use it as a mouse. This takes a little bit of getting used to, but I actually found myself using it more for games like Civilization 5, where I actually needed a more mouse and keyboard friendly experience. It's nice to be able to have a mouse that can just snap onto the side of the console whenever you need to use it. I did find that the thumbstick did dig into my hand a little bit while playing in FPS mode. You can snap this off and there is a place for it in the case, but it still leaves this little nub. Now, it's no secret that there is a lot of hardware in here and it requires adequate cooling. So the fan that's in the Legion Go, when it ramps up, really does ramp up. Seriously, it sounds like a jet engine taking off. Running the fan at 100%, you're gonna need headphones and pretty good noise cancelling ones too. And everyone around you is going to know that you're gaming. This is not a quiet system, and the Steam Deck was far from quiet, but this one takes sound to a next level. So that's the hardware out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about the software. This device comes with Windows 11 by default. And though the majority of the handhelds on the market right now come with Windows 11, the Steam Deck comes with Steam OS. And actually this is the main reason to choose something like the Steam Deck. The operating system is just built from the ground up to work with handhelds. And you can tell straight away, Windows 11 is not the same. The setup was clunky without a keyboard and mouse. A lot of the time I found that the on-screen keyboard just didn't show up. But once I finally got through all of the normal Windows 11 setup, I was taken to the desktop and the experience was pretty easy to navigate. After installing all the different storefronts like Ubisoft, Steam, Epic and others, I was pretty much ready to game. This was actually one of the advantages of running Windows 11 on a handheld over SteamOS. It supports all of the different storefronts that SteamOS simply can't. When it comes to launching games natively, the Legion Go actually has its own software that they call Legion Space. And unfortunately, even though it's had a lot of improvements over the year, it's still not that great. You'll get dumped to this storefront, which uses some weird website that I've never heard of to buy your games, but of course you can still use all your Steam and Unreal storefronts. Going along one tab is where you see all your games that you have installed. it is quite nice to be able to see all of your games from all your platforms installed in one place. I don't have to go to all of the separate launchers to find the game that I want. Going along from that, you've also got your settings, where you can choose cool things like the lighting for your controllers, how the screen's going to run. But let's talk about the thing that we actually all care about, and that is the gaming experience. For a while I've been running a Steam Deck and I've found its experience to be fine, but then picking up this handheld, it's like night and day. The games that ran fairly well on the Steam Deck run absolutely beautifully on the go, and games that I just couldn't run at all on the deck run pretty well here. Games like The Crew 2, which are known to be notoriously unoptimised and pretty slow, look absolutely great here and play just as well. I don't think I've ever come across a game that I've struggled to run on the go. There are some games where I've had to drop down the experience from a high to perhaps a medium or even a low at lower resolutions. But honestly, on this screen, I really didn't notice it too much, and I just got absolutely enthralled and stuck into the games that I was playing. Another thing adding to the sheer size and weight of this console is its 49.2 watt-hour battery. This is an enormous battery, and it's actually the biggest on the market. And you would think this enormous battery would mean great battery life, but unfortunately that just isn't the case. You're pushing a lot of power through a lot of powerful hardware and a very nice screen, meaning that for the most part I was getting between an hour and 2 hours of gameplay. Maybe I could push it to 4 or 5 with some of the less taxing games like Broforce or Enter the Gungeon. In terms of size and portability, it's actually very similar to the Steam Deck in terms of its size. The main differences are actually its thickness, and that's because of the battery and the better performing parts. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that this isn't handheld and that this isn't portable. It absolutely is. It's just perhaps a little bit heavier than some of the other options on the market. So would I recommend the Legion Go? It's actually one of the more expensive options on the market, coming in at around £600. But what you do get is a lot of performance and that absolutely gorgeous screen. Seriously, there is nothing quite like this screen on a handheld right now. And sure, those additional play modes may seem a little bit gimmicky, but actually in terms of comfort, especially when travelling on a train, those extra modes might well be something that you are interested in. It certainly was for me. But it's certainly not for everyone. Windows 11 does mean that things can take a little bit of tinkering and things will be a little bit quirky. If you're used to a console experience and haven't done a lot of PC gaming, then this might be a little bit overwhelming to you, and I might suggest going with something a little bit more closed like the Steam Deck and SteamOS, because everything there just seems to work. However, if you want the best of the best in terms of screens, and just in terms of fun, I genuinely would recommend the Legion Go to almost anybody. There are of course other options on the market like the ROG Ally X, and all of these kinds of handhelds have the same hardware in them. The main changes are that screen and the battery life. So what do you guys think of the Legion Go? Do you think it's one of the best handhelds on the market right now? Or do you still think that the Steam Deck is the best option out there? Why don't you let me know, and while you're down there as well, get subscribed, because it genuinely does mean the world to me. Anyway guys, my name's been Robert, this has been Bite Size Clue, and I will catch you in the next one. Adios.